Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hangout. My name is Elian Ramos, and I'm ERD Goddess on Twitter and elsewhere. And tonight I'm going to be hosting a very important conversation on a very hot topic. As you know, immigration is a very heated political debate, and it's also the cause of a lot of suffering for many people. It's become a real human rights crisis in this country. Millions of people's lives are now practically in limbo because of the lack of resolution to this problem. And so tonight I'm honored to have with me some of the glitterati of the activism immigration reform movement. I am very honored to have with me the people whose efforts are being felt all over the country as they fight for politicians to pay attention to this issue. First off, we have what can I say about this person, Eliseo Medina, who is a true legend of the labor, the immigration, and the civic rights movement in this country. He's the current Secretary Treasurer of the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, and he is also a former board member of the United Farm Workers. How are you, Eliseo?
I'm fine, Elian. And just for clarification, I'm the retired Secretary Treasurer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I decided I wanted to spend time on immigration reform, so that's all I'm doing right now.
Well, we do not retire. Don't lie to us because we know how active you are out there. But next up is Pramilah Jayapal, and Pramilah is the co-chair of We Belong Together, and she's also the founder of OneAmerica, which is the largest immigrant advocacy organization in Washington State. How are you, Pramilah?
I'm great. It's great to be back here on the Hangout with you, Elian.
Thanks for being here. And next up is Gaby Pacheco, my dear friend, and also another one of the luminaries of the movement. Gaby is the director of the Bridge Project, and she's a dreamer. She's actually one of the starters of the whole dreamer movement. Gaby, thank you so much for being here tonight.
I love you, and I wouldn't miss it for the world.
And we're waiting for another participant, Susana Sandoval, and I know that she's gonna come in at very soon. But in the meantime, I want to give you a couple of reminders. If you missed any part of this broadcast, it's going to be available again on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/user/Elian Ramos. And here also on Google Plus. So make sure that you bookmark it so you can watch it again. And so let's start with the questions. My first one is, of course, to Eliseo. Eliseo, you have such an amazing trajectory in this community in fighting for all kinds of rights. The labor rights, the civic rights, the immigration rights. You were right there with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, which is an amazing feat that you got that you did there. But also you are translating all of that knowledge into the movement for immigration now. So in your eyes, how does the immigration reform movement compare to all the other fights that the community has had to face over the years?
Well, again, thank you so much, Eliana, for having me with you. Let me just say that I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and many of my mentors that taught me about organizing, about people uniting to be able to deal with the problems that we have. But I think that the comparison to today's struggle and what we went to with the farm workers is incredible. In the old days, it was that one of us, whether we were farm workers or whether we're janitors, we all fought our battles by ourselves, and there wasn't the same level of unity that we see today. In the old days, we're Mexicans, we're Central Americans, we're Indians, or whatever part of the world, and we were fighting by ourselves many times on some of these issues. Today, it really doesn't matter what part of the world we come from. We understand that the only way we're going to win justice for immigrants is if we all fight and work together And so the level of unity to me is a major, major difference. And it's not just in California, it's not in Chicago. You know, we find it in Alabama, in North Carolina, South Carolina. And the other thing is that the level of support that we have for this struggle, we have business, we have communities of faith, we have environmental groups, we have unions, and it has become a tremendous consensus in this country that immigration reform needs to get done. And then the final thing I would just say is, because this fight has taken so long, is that we have a huge wealth of new leaders that have sprung up. You know, people like Gabby, people like Pramilah, like yourself. You know, people ask me all the time is, you know, one of the problems with your movement is you don't have a Cesar Chavez. And I say they're right. We don't have a Cesar Chavez. We have thousands of Cesar Chavez. And I think that makes our movement now much, much stronger than any in my memory.
Well, I'm very flattered that you include me in every day I see all of the amazing things that you guys are doing. And we were having this conversation right before we started, and I'm in awe of all of the work that you do. So speaking of the same work that you're doing every day, that you've been doing for years, there have been all kinds of actions nationwide, led by all of your groups, by many other groups. To, you know, obviously I cannot invite everyone to be here with us tonight. But there's been the marches, the petitions, there's been the visits to the Congress, there's been fasts like the ones that you have led. So many things. Do you feel these actions have been effective? Do you feel that the response from the legislators has been appropriate to everything that you're doing?
I mean, I can take a first crack at that. I think that they have been incredibly effective, and I think that you can see that in everything from where public opinion is on immigration reform today and where it was 5 years ago. The public conversation is not whether we should have immigration reform. The public conversation is, can we get this very small group of legislators, extreme legislators in the House that are blocking immigration reform from happening, can we get them to do the right thing, the thing that the country knows is the right thing to do? And so, Elian, you and I were doing a hunger fast for 48 hours on the National Mall with 100 other women a couple of weeks ago. Eliseo was on a bus tour with the Fast for Families across the country, I think bringing the moral voice to the picture, bringing women to the picture, showing the suffering of women and children, women who are facing deportation, families who are being torn apart, but also the resilience and the courage. And I think the thing about organizing is you never know when that moment is going to be the tipping point moment. Everything keeps accumulating on top of each other. You know, little things, big things, they pile up on top of each other, and you finally get to this moment where everything bursts open and you actually have the opportunity for change. So the legislators are not, the ones that we care about that we need to move this forward are not yet responding the way we want them to respond, but I think that this is the moment, that the time is not done. They still have an opportunity to do what's right for the country, what's right for the economy, and what's right for women, children, and families, and we're going to keep pushing until they do that.
I agree. Yeah. Anybody else?
I just wanted to add that for us, and at least for me, being young and being actually considered one of the older dreamers doing this work for some time now, it's just amazing to see the change that has happened in the last decade, right? From seeing people being so afraid to talk about their status, to not even mentioning it, to now sharing their stories, and through their stories changing hearts and minds and really empowering communities to come out and no longer be afraid. And from the times when Cesar Chavez were doing his hunger strikes, we see how everything we've been doing just really has helped us move inch by inch. And so from his hunger strike to the fast that Eliseo was part of, to the women doing the 48-hour hunger strike, to the people who just finished their hunger strike outside of the White House, and the president mentioning it and saying, and the president visiting Eliseo, all those things I think have been really important because we're noticeable now. We're no longer people living in the shadows. We're no longer this issue that nobody wants to talk about. As a matter of fact, I was in Florida a couple of days ago, and on the floor, as they were discussing the in-situation legislation, I was baffled. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because years ago, it was Democrats who were pushing the issue forward, one Republican that happened to be Latino and Colombian that wanted to push it forward. But this time around, it was Republicans saying, hey, we need to get with the program. It's the right thing to do. And I think one of the reasons why we have that is because, like Pramilah was saying, the public has noticed because we've made noise, and the public specifically that has noticed are voters. So we have so many more people doing this action, which is registering to vote and voting, and that has scared a lot of the politicians because they know they need our vote. No longer is the Latino vote or the Asian vote or the woman vote something that they could ignore. So I think that all of our actions have helped create such an awareness, not only in the politicians' mind, in the community's mind, but also in the voters' minds.
Eliseo, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would just add that we've gone from calls for self-deportation a year and a half ago to today, the conversation being about how and when are we going to get immigration reform and what does it look like. It is now the prevailing view that they are going to have to do it. And we're just having the argument about when and what it looks like. So I think we made a lot of progress. Obviously, we're not there yet. And like everything else, we're going to have to keep pushing to get to the finish line. But now it's an accepted premise that immigrants not only belong here, but that also need to be treated fairly and with respect.
Mm-hmm. And what I don't understand is this, there are so many advantages to approving the reform and to getting a solution to this. What do you think is at the heart of the resistance? Because there's some resistance to actually going through it and doing something about the problem. Why is it still an issue?
Well, Eliana, I think that in this country we have a very complicated relationship with race and with dealing with newcomers to this country. You saw the same thing that happened with the Irish. It happened with Germans. It happened with the Italians. It happened certainly with African Americans and with all of these different people that came to this country, certainly with Native Americans. And in every generation, there's always a struggle to become part of this society and part of this country. I think now it's today's generation of immigrants is going through that same struggle. But when they are forced to organize and to fight for themselves, eventually they become part of the society. And unfortunately, I think that recently one part of the Republican Party particularly has been xenophobia. The other one is fear, because somehow they think that if today's immigrants become part of society, that somehow we are going to become the voters of the other party. And so therefore, the fear of the electoral consequences drives them to try and keep immigrants out. But at the end of the day, that's a self-defeating attitude. And I think that more and more we're seeing more enlightened public officials coming forth and saying we have to do this. It's not only good for immigrants, it's good for our country and it's good for our party.
Yeah, and I mean, it's undeniable, and you can feel it almost in the air, right? Something is coming. There's going to be a major policy change coming soon. So who do you think is going to bite the bullet first? Who's going to, like we say in the industry, who's going to speak first?
You mean in terms of how legislation happens, or?
In terms of who's going to take the first step into getting something done about immigration? Do you think the president is going to stop the deportations altogether and say this is what's going to happen, or is the Republican Party, or that the segment of the Republican Party who is against it, because it's not the whole party? Is that segment going to say finally let's do this?
Well, I'll just tell you that I think the president went first. He did DACA, and then, of course, the U.S. Senate last year passed Senate Bill 744 for immigration reform. Now what's holding us back is the House of Representatives. So I think what's going to happen is that either they act over the next 2 months, or then the president will act on administrative relief. So I think that we are going to get something done this year, whether it's immigration reform or administrative relief. I would hope that the House of Representatives acts first, because anything that they pass, having legislation is better than having an administrative action that by its very nature is more limited and temporary, whereas legislation would be much more expensive and is of a permanent nature. So I think the Republican Party is up against the wall. They're going to have to decide, because the elections of 2014 are going to come up, and immigrants are paying very close attention, and there are going to be consequences at the polls if they refuse to act. And then, of course, there's 2016 coming, and every single day that goes by, more and more immigrants and Latinos are becoming eligible to vote, and we are paying very close attention to what they do. So I think the pressure is on the Republican Party. Either they act or the president will, and then I think immigrants will be voting in November.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and Elian,
go ahead.
Elian, one of the things that gives me so much hope is what's been happening since 2010. And in 2010, we saw that immigration reform, or comprehensive immigration reform, just didn't happen. And we quickly shifted to push for the DREAM Act. And the DREAM Act didn't happen either. But in 2001, we got our first kind of sense of what potentially, even if Congress doesn't want to act, we can do, which was the Morton Memo, right? And that was a different guide, a different direction that the administration said, you know what, separating families, taking mothers from children, leaving children in foster care is the wrong thing, and that's not the American thing, and we're going to change that. And then 2012, like Eliseo mentioned, we saw the president act on DACA, and it gave so much hope to millions of dreamers. We have over 600,000 dreamers that have applied for DACA, over 500,000 that have received the work permit and started living their lives and are working and going back to school and don't have to live that fear of, you know, if the police are going to stop me and are they going to separate me. And then this, in 2013, we saw the Senate Act. But one of the things that I think is important, and Pramilah can talk more about this too, about all the ordinances, the city council, things that have been passing, we are seeing a complete shift from 2010 and Arizona SB 1070 to New Jersey passing in-state tuition. Just recently, Virginia putting together and saying, you know what, we are going to make sure that our dreamers get to go to college, and so we're not even going to go through the state legislature. We're just going to make this change because this is the right thing to do. To Florida seeing passing in-state tuition, and the governor being Republican, being behind it. And all of that just shows us that we have power, and that we have to create change, not just at our laws, right? And I completely agree with Eliseo, you know, a law is really important. But one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is the fact that you have the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, saying, I'm reviewing our ways and the currently our deportation policies, which we all know are wrong. We all know that they're doing the wrong thing, that programs like Secure Communities and 287G are leading to immigrants, specifically Latinos, in high rate. We're talking about 97%, I think, was a report that just came out, are targeting Latinos in our communities. And so we're seeing all these changes happening, and we cannot give up on Congress. We know that Republicans, we see Boehner, who's struggling, going back and forth, saying, you know, we want to do this. Our Republican members, some of them are scared of doing this. But we have to be the ones to show them that all these different states have been turning around and nothing has happened. On the contrary, look what happened with DACA. Hundreds and thousands of people came out and voted for the president, people that would have stayed home because they weren't feeling like they could vote for him, because they didn't feel like they had something to vote for. But DACA gave that opportunity because they saw a president that was willing to take a step and do something about this.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to do a little parentheses here to welcome Susana Sandoval, who just joined us. How are you, Susana?
I'm good. Glad to be here.
Susana is a writer, educator, and a fierce fighter for immigration, for education, for economic prosperity. And we are so happy that you are here, Susana. We've been waiting for you all this time. So let's continue with the conversation, because Gabby, you left at a very interesting point there, and to follow up on what you were saying about the deportations and your hope that they will stop. Last week, there was an Immigration Policy Institute report that came out about deportations and the criminal prosecutions of immigrants. Do you think, and I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but the report was very explicit about the number of people who have been deported and the reasons why they have been deported, and it really kind of puts a stain in the whole discourse, because we know these people, we know the families that are suffering. We sit down with them and talk to these people every single day. So do you think this report is going to put more pressure on the administration to come up with a solution to deportations?
I think so. I mean, I think that it's the report, and it's also all of the actions that are happening across the country. You know, there's been a hunger strike going on at the Northwest Detention Center that's really gotten the attention of a lot of people across the country, national press, national media. We have protesters down there that are blocking the buses of people that are taking the detainees out to deport them. And I think that, again, it's sort of the statistics by a very reputable source. It just confirms, or sort of, you know, puts onto paper what we all have known and seen in our communities. And I think Eliseo's analysis that we essentially are waiting for the House to act for a little bit longer, but that time is running out very quickly. If the House does not act on immigration reform very soon, in this next month really, then I think then the focus shifts over to how can the President continue to help us through administrative action and taking actions that actually stop people from being deported, and provide, I mean, it's sort of two pieces. It's enforcement relief, so making sure we're not deporting as many people, and then also it's making sure that there's affirmative relief, making sure we expand DACA, have other opportunities for people to be here, as Gabby talked about them. And one thing, you know, Eliseo was talking about fear as one of the big pieces. It is the fear of that change of power, I think, that is tied deeply to racism, and to giving up, people's fear of giving up control of power. But one of the things that I think is really helping us is Gabby's generation and the dreamers, because I think that part of what we're seeing across the country is that young people identify in numerous ways, and they're not relegated to one category, and they are out there very hopeful, very loud, very prominently claiming a future that includes everybody in it. And so I think that's why you see the DREAM Act, for example. You know, Washington State, we've always had in-state tuition, but we just passed our version of an expanded DREAM Act, which is to also provide financial aid to undocumented students here in Washington State. 3 years ago, we couldn't get a single Republican to sign on. This year, we had a Republican majority in the House, in the Senate, excuse me, and we passed it out with a Republican majority. I mean, it's called a coalition majority, because there's a couple of Democrats who call themselves Democrats but are caucusing with the Republicans. And but it was the Republicans from Eastern Washington and Central Washington, because they see their districts changing, because they don't want to be against young people, because they don't want to be against the future. And so I think that even though we haven't seen comprehensive immigration reform pass, what we have seen through this wave of activism and wave of actions that have been happening, and the changing public sentiment, is a whole series of changes at the state legislative level, at the local levels, people kind of coming forward and saying, okay, if Congress is stalled, then we're going to take things back into our hands, not in the way that that Arizona did with SB 1070 or Alabama or Georgia, but in fact in a positive, proactive direction for immigrants. And I think that's a very hopeful thing that will continue.
And if I may, Eliana, one thing that I would like to add is that, you know, when we say Republicans, we're not really talking about Republicans per se. We're talking about Republican elected officials, because every poll that has been done over the last year show a majority of Republican members
That's right.
being in support of immigration reform. So there's Republicans, Democrats, and independents who believe that it is time to do immigration reform. The problem is that so far the majority of the Congress has been behind where the people are. And I think over time this is going to change as well, because the consensus is strong and growing for immigration reform.
And in fact, Eliseo, just to pick up on that too, the Senate bill that passed, the Senate immigration reform bill that passed, was the biggest bipartisan majority for any bill in recent history. So I think that's a very important point that you make.
Well, I also want to go back a little bit to talk about the opportunity that we have right now in regards to, you know, immigration reform and the work that's being done. You talked a little bit about, Pramilah talked a little bit about the intergenerational focus, the communication that's happening. I think that it's apparent that both parties are slightly disconnected from the people, and I think that it's an opportunity around the immigration reform issue. And immigration reform, as I talk with folks on the Hill and off the Hill and in different offices and even organizing communities, immigration reform touches on every single system. It has an economic impact on a very local level. And the issue around immigration reform is a federal versus states' rights issue. Great, you pass a federal law, and then at the state level, is the state supposed to take on the economic impact, or is it left in the hands of the federal government to dictate or to give parameters around it? And so even though we have a Senate bill that is called comprehensive, I think the opportunity for it to be comprehensive relies on the people. And the fact that it's being discussed in an election cycle, and I'm from Illinois, so we just had a myriad of Republican voices come out and say that they were, you know, for immigration reform. And I think that it's an opportunity for people in general, regardless across party lines, to understand what it means to be an American. And I think that I constantly talk about the identity crisis, which is a moral crisis, but it behooves everyone who is a current citizen and who wants to become a citizen and has yet to become one to re-engage in the process and learn what that means. And so if it means to re-engage civically and it means to understand, I mean, when I was growing up, we had a Mr. Bill cartoon that showed up on Saturdays, right? So I'm kind of timing myself, right? I'm a little bit in between everyone's generation. But I mean, the thing is, at least in some format, the media was allowing people that kind of civic education, that civic information to re-engage folks. And, you know, I grew up in the media. My family owns some media outlets. I am also very critical about how the immigration reform has been positioned in the media and how we don't have the stories of the economic impact or the research, like my good friend Dr. Gonzalez, who is originally from Chicago, who's doing all the DACA research, and all the other academic folks who are investing, you know, as well as the institutions like the Immigration Policy Center or many of the other research that's out there, to get in the hands of our legislators in order to be able to be translated into law. So I mean, I think it's an opportunity that we have. Immigration is an American issue. I think that it allows folks to take a look at a holistic nature and say it affects healthcare, it affects, you know, our economics, our workforce development issues, it affects many, many communities. And what we do in the next 3 to 5 years is going to define what's going to happen to our country in the next 10 to 20 years. And so you have population growth, but if you don't have the economic opportunities in order to engage a workforce that exists, and that includes the 12 million undocumented immigrants that are already here, then we're creating and we're perpetuating the domestic terrorism on ourselves.
I'm going to, and I agree completely with what you're saying, Susana. I am going to take the conversation into a little bit of a different direction right now. It looks like from the outside, like the movement is a little fragmented, and I hope you don't take it in the wrong way, because I have been able to work with all of you, and I know it is not so, but from the outside, I have gotten comments sometimes that it's a little fragmented. On the one side, you seem to have the people who just want, the deportations to stop, and they don't want anything else, and they're willing to not take anything else if the deportations are stopped. And on the other side, you have people who say, no, that's just going to hurt the cause if you stop that, and and that's going to cause a whole lot of other problems. We want the full package. So why do you think, what do you think is the biggest priority of the two, if there is one? And is it a zero-sum game? Is it something where one thing cannot live without can live without the other, or vice versa? What do you think?
Go ahead, Gabby.
Thank you, Lisa. So I think that we have branches of government for a reason, right? And the executive branch, after September 11th, decided to take on, and actually in 1996, start taking on the issue of immigration reform. And by doing that, it gave its power to the president. So the president, overseeing the Department of Homeland Security, he is responsible to ensure that the Department of Homeland Security is doing its job and it's doing what it's supposed to, and not going after our families and terrorizing our families, but rather going after terrorists, right? That's one of the things. Mm-hmm. And so there has to be a push, and we have to push the president to give relief in a way that doesn't necessarily mean maybe giving TPS for everybody, right? Though that's something that we could push for. But it necessarily means creating enforcement policies that work, that we're not deporting people for driving without a license, people that could, under the Senate S744 bill, become a legal permanent resident and potentially a citizen. And then you have the legislative branch, and they're designated to create laws. And the laws that they've created since 1986 and even before are outdated. They don't make sense to our current 21st century economy. It doesn't make sense to the way our families and the way the United States functions and the way we're supposed to be as a nation. And so it is their job. It is Congress and the Senate's job to do something. And so I think one of the things that we kind of fall into, right, every single one of us, is some people are in one lane and they're pushing the president. And that's important, right? Because we see that Congress is slow walking this, and they've been slow walking it. We've all said here that they have fear. They're all afraid of doing immigration reform because they don't know what's going to happen when they come back home and if they're going to be primaried, right? We're seeing some videos coming out, and they're actually, to me now, they used to be scary. I used to see those videos from really conservative members, and I would say, my God, how do they talk about us like that? Why would they call us illegal aliens, right? That was something, a sense of fear. But now I watch those things and I laugh. And I laugh because I'm like, you're so without the time. Like, you are, those videos are archaic. So I think that we're all in sync in the way that we all want relief. We want all what's best for our communities, for our families, and it's not a zero-sum game, because by pushing the president, in a way, we're pushing Congress, because Congress doesn't want the president to act. Congress, when we had DACA, the reason why we got DACA is because there was a pull and push that was happening with back then Senator Marco Rubio, who said, I'm going to do my own DREAM Act. And then we said, fine, the president can do the same thing. And yes, it would be momentarily, but after 2 years, DACA is going to renew. Most likely in June, we'll hear something about those renewals. And in the meantime that we haven't had reform, we have been able to save all those lives. We have been able to give opportunities to all those people. So I say, it's not a zero-sum game. I think all of us are doing the right thing. Specifically now, I talk about the Bridge Project. We have been building relationships with Republicans because we know that it takes two to tango. Right, we need the Democrats and we need the Republicans in order to get things done. And we've also been pushing the president and been saying, look, you need to reform your enforcement policies. And so, and I think it's two different things that we need to understand with administrative relief. One is actual relief, like DACA, and the other thing is memos like the John Morton memo fixing that. So by him doing that, or the secretary announcing that they're going to do that, doesn't necessarily mean that they're creating relief or that they're undermining the power that Congress has to create laws.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's really, I think it is really important to understand that the whole immigration system is so complex, and what may seem fragmented to the outside actually I think is also part and parcel of having this immigration system that has so many different components to it. It's about who gets to stay here, it's about how people come in, it's about how people work, it's about how people are allowed to stay, and the enforcement side of things. And so all of these different things have different approaches to how they get resolved or how they get answered. Our attempts at a comprehensive immigration reform bill are, I think are actually so much more unified now than they were 5 or 6 years ago, the last time around in 2007. And Eliseo, I see you nodding out of the corner of my eye down at the screen, because we all know what it was like in 2007. It was really, really intense. And I think that that intensity is not necessarily always a bad thing. It was not easy to go through, but I actually think it allowed us to come back stronger after that. And I think that if politics is the art of the possible, then it's our job as organizers to push the limits of what's seen as possible. And so for me, part of what I see is all of the different voices that are pushing for change, whether it's administrative relief, enforcement reform, or immigration reform from Congress, that all of those things actually need to happen, and we do need voices pushing on all of those things. Our folks are really smart. When we had our women's summit, and it included a lot of affected women as well as women's rights leaders from across the country, Eliana, I think you were there in February, one of the things that I was amazed at is that people are suffering. They are absolutely suffering in the moment. They do want relief, but they also understand what Eliseo was getting at the very beginning, which is that any kind of administrative action like DACA, it can be undone by somebody down the road. They get that we want a permanent solution. Now, if a permanent solution doesn't look like it's going to happen, and the closer we get to seeing a permanent solution look like it's not going to happen, the more people are going to say, well, then what's our other option, right? And so I think that the movement to really push on both sides very aggressively, particularly at this late date, is to be expected, and I think we should use it to the best of our ability, and to benefit all of us, and to continue to recognize that we've got the small window with Congress, but that if that doesn't happen, I think the president has said and the administration has shown that they are looking. We know they are looking very seriously at all of the options available to them.
And I definitely think that for a movement to be successful, you do need all of these different voices in there pushing in from the different directions, because that's the only way that you can really have a comprehensive action taken. If you're just pushing on one side, it's going to get disbalanced. So speaking of that, one of the main components of the movement through all these years has been the Dreamer group. You guys, Gabby, you have been the leader of this movement for Dreamers since 2007. When did we meet? We met in like 2008, and you were already out there. So what do you think is the focus of the Dreamers right now within the larger movement?
So I think there is different focuses, right? So we have the Dreamers who participated in the Not One More campaign, and we're doing the hunger strike outside of the White House, trying to get the president to act on administrative relief. And then we also have dreamers like United We Dream, who today went and occupied and did a sit-in in Senator Schumer's office, right? A Democrat, to say, we need you to support administrative relief, we need you to push the president. And then you have dreamers like ourselves, the Bridge Project, who are spending hours. Every day we're meeting with 5, 6, 7 offices, Republican and Democratic offices in Congress, and walking the hills of the, because we're preparing. We're seeing there's movement happening in Congress, and we need to be prepared, because just pushing for immigration reform and not being ready for the policy, not understanding what the legislation it's going to include, it's also very dangerous. So we're engaging with Republicans and Democrats right now, currently in Congress, because we know that we need an immigration legislation. We need to pass something that is doable, viable, that is not going to hurt our families or hurt our future immigrant communities to come. And so we're pushing, like you said, from all different fronts, coming at it different ways. And, there's also other dreamers that are holding the Republicans accountable for their work. And so they've done bird dogging, they've gone and waited for Republicans, they've done actions on Speaker Boehner's office and his home and other places. And all of that is needed to keep the pressure on, to keep the heat on. And the focus on the number one fact, which is we need a solution to the immigration problem, to the hurting, to the pain that our community is going through, and to the fact that our immigration policy is outdated, it doesn't make sense, and that both parties need to come together. Republicans need to realize that it's the right thing to do, and it's the time to do it.
And in that same vein, so beautifully put, Gabby. Thank you for that. I completely agree. Pramila, in the same vein, I want to ask you, because you work with different organizations and different segments of the population, there's this perception out there that the immigration issue is just a Latino issue. And we all know that is not true. So how can we change that perception out there? How can we bring all of these other groups into the fold here and give more visibility to their voices?
Well, I think it has been happening, and part of it is by bringing the question up when we have, a lot of it is that the story is shaped by the national media sometimes. And I think if you look at the Fast for Families and you look at, Eliseo right next to DJ from the Korean American community, you look at the fact that there's 1 million APIs who are undocumented that people aren't talking about necessarily, but they're there, and we are bringing their stories forward, all of us on this call. I think that, there's also, when we talk about immigration reform, there's 4.5 million families who are stuck in the family backlog, and Filipinos in particular who have to wait 20 to 22 years to bring a loved one an immediate family member into the country. I think it's really up to us to continue to make those connections. And just like we said, sometimes Congress is behind the people. Sometimes the media is behind where we are. So the reality is that, we're organizing, we're bringing APIs, we're bringing African immigrants, we're bringing Russian immigrants, so many different kinds of immigrants into this discussion, because the immigration system as a whole has so many people from all across the world as part of it, and all across the country as part of it. And I think we just have to keep being intentional about lifting up those voices, because what does happen, and I think this is what you're referring to, is that we have had to do a lot of education with APIs, for example, to say, yeah, we really do care about this. It's not just about Latinos. We actually do know about the family backlogs. We know about the 1 million APIs who are undocumented. You are part of this movement. And so I think that is, unfortunately the perception gets shaped that way by the national media, but we can change that story, and we do it through lifting up very diverse audiences. And I know at We Belong Together, we're very intentional about trying to make sure that the stories we lift up represent the diversity of people affected by a broken immigration system. And I'm very hopeful that we have a beautiful, diverse movement for immigration reform and for change in this country.
I love that point because it brings me right to the following question, and I want to be very mindful of Eliseo's time. I know, Eliseo, that you have a show to do right after this, so I'm going to ask you to be a little brief so that we can cover as many questions as we can before 8 o'clock. But the next question is. Knowing that we're trying to bring all of these voices into the fold, how do you see the movement evolving as we move forward, especially now that the elections are coming? How do you see all of that playing out?
Well, I tell you, I think that the world has changed, and we are going to see that reflected from now on, not only in the marches and in the activities of the immigrant rights movement, we're going to see it on election day. And I think you're going to see a lot more voters that really look like America. And I think that's good for democracy. And I think that's good for our movement, that's good for America. And I think that that's one of the things both political parties will have to take into consideration, that they're going to have to figure out how they have a relationship with immigrants of respect, and that they begin to address the issues that we care about, because we will be voting and we will be heard. And I think that you're also going to see more and more people like Pramilah being elected to political offices all over this country, and that that also is very good for America. So I think this is not just an issue about immigration reform. This is an issue about what this country is going to look like and what's it going to stand for in the future.
Beautiful, beautiful. Anyone else?
I want to speak to that. 4 years ago, when we started talking about other strategies to use outside of the typical organizing strategies, I helped start Immigration PAC, which was the first federal PAC on immigration reform. And I remember coming back from DC and having more traditional organizers ask me why and what was the purpose of that, and I started sharing the information, not just with Latino immigrants, but also going to a lot of ethnic communities, women's groups, folks that weren't traditionally as active in the political process, and helping them get that educational information about if they wanted to choose that as a strategy. And I think that that's what we're going to see more of. You see it now, right now. I mean, there's plenty of PACs that are activated that are either women funded, immigrant funded, and I know that I've done a fair amount of work across different ethnic communities to know that the folks that have been seeding this work across the country, you're going to see a lot of that being activated. When immigrants realize that the billions of dollars that they use and that they are the foundation for the American economy, and when we understand what political force that is and we can translate that into participation, I think that's what we're going to see. And I agree with Eliseo in that we're going to see a lot more women get elected. We're going to see a lot more folks that wouldn't traditionally go into the political profession because, you know, people are being re-engaged and they're understanding what that complete citizenship package means and what it means to actually vote and to be civically participating.
Awesome. And so I'm going to go back to Eliseo because we're about to finish. Eliseo, I don't want to let you go before you give us your words of wisdom. For those of us who are in the movement now, who look up to you, who see you as our leader or mentor, so to speak. What words do you have for the people out there who are watching?
Well, thank you very much, Eliana. It's very kind of you. But let me just say, change is hard. Change takes a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of commitment. And sometimes when you're trying to make a big change, it's easy to get discouraged. But if you get discouraged and quit fighting, nothing will ever change. In my experience, having started with the Farm Workers Union and 49 years after I began that, the one thing I've learned that if we keep fighting and if we keep uniting people, that eventually we will win. And I am absolutely sure we're going to win immigration reform. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But let me just say that once we win immigration reform, and again, we will win it, then what? We know that there's millions of U.S. citizens living in poverty, and just simply having legal papers will not be enough to give us the American dream that we all came to this country to seek. And so there's a lot of other issues that we need to deal with to make sure that our community is able to enjoy the fruits of this great country. Our kids need better education. Workers need to be treated fairly and earn decent wages with benefits so they can take care of their families. Our senior citizens need to be able to have a safe and secure golden years. Our communities need to be safer, and they need to have a clean environment. So after we win immigration reform, that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of the next phase of our struggle. And as long as we all continue to working together, one thing we've learned about in this movement is that united, nothing is impossible. We will get this done, and we will move united into the future to creating the America of our dreams. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. Thank you, Liana, for hosting this.
No, I am, again, it's such an honor to have you. It's really kind of a dream come true to have all of these leaders in the same room, even if it's a virtual room. I appreciate all of you. I want to give you the last couple of minutes that we have to tell me what are your plans for the organizations that each of you are leading, and what is your call to action? How can people help you in what you are doing?
Well, We Belong Together, the website is webelongtogether.org, and it's specifically around engaging, mobilizing women in support of immigration reform and bringing a gender analysis to the table. And we have a number of things that we're doing, including a series where we're going to be lifting up the stories of people in women and children in deportation called Hello Vuelo. So you can go on our website and find out about that. And we also have a number of actions that we'll be doing over the week of the first week of June, which will be sort of the last period before Congress goes into recess. And so we just encourage women across the country to see this issue as one of the key women's rights issues in our country today. Gloria Steinem has said herself that this is one of the top issues facing women, is to pass immigration reform that's fair and inclusive to women and be able to get women into the picture again. So I'm really excited about that, because I feel like part of what we've been able to do is bring the over 52% of voters across the country who are women into the conversation, and to once again push. I think every politician understands that the women's vote is critical. So I'm just looking forward to having all the women and the supportive men out there join the struggle for immigration reform.
Anybody else? Eliseo?
Just the next 2 months are absolutely critical. Call, text, write, visit your legislator and put pressure on the time for immigration reform. We need a vote. No CIR, no peace. Stay on them until they take a vote and until they do immigration reform. Help us out. By July, we can have immigration reform if we all pull together and fight together.
Gabby?
Uh-oh.
Susanna, you're up
there. There we go. Okay.
Okay.
So I think we've covered kind of the different steps, right? So if you haven't registered to vote, register to vote. If you have registered to vote and can vote, vote. If you don't have the ability yet to either register or vote, but you could pick up a phone, you could put a message on Facebook, on Twitter. You cannot believe how many members actually look at that and feel offended when somebody writes to them saying, oh, I'm not supporting you because you're not supporting immigration, right? They take all of that, the calls, the emails, all of that makes a difference. Opening our mouths and voicing what we have. I think that's one of the most important things that we have learned, our tool to tell our story and to really use our voice to empower other people and say, you know, I've seen the light, and now I'm going to share with you my light. And once the light is out, nobody could take it away from us. So those things are really important. And one of the things that I'm learning to do now, because different people have different ways of supporting. And some people are working a lot or cannot, you know, just maybe they want to do a little bit more than a call. Then participate and donate and give to all these different organizations that are doing this work. That's the only way we're able to do it. And so aside from working on the Bridge Project, one of the things that I'm super happy and drives me every day to juggle 3 different things at once is the scholarship program for Dreamers. So passing on the word, the fact that there's all these different opportunities for communities, for people to go to college, that you know, this is really for our future. When we look at our children, we got to think about what are we leaving for them, and as what they call quote unquote minority communities, which we're going to become a majority pretty soon, is are we preparing our community for all of that? So donating to these organizations that are doing this work. And so it's really easy. You go to thedream.us/donate, and you can make a donation from $10 to $100, which would cover a credit hour for a student who wants to go to college. To, you know, the organizations that currently, right now, we have the Bridge Project that does this work. It's right now 5 dreamers. We range from the age of 19 to 29, and we do this with so much heart. And we go up there and talk to different members and do it every day because we know that it's important to tell our stories and to make the connection and organize. So different ways you can support and help, and every way makes a difference.
And I'm going to do a little bracket again, a little parenthesis. Eliseo had to leave because he has a radio show that he has to do. He's very in demand, and you know, we're so glad that even though he has retired, that he's still out there fighting the good fight. So very thankful to the folks at SEIU for lending him to me for a little bit. And now, Susana, call to action.
I think the call to action, I think we know that there's a lot of tools at our disposal. I think that we have to continuously keep educating each other around like the social media. My hat's off to the Dreamers because you all have really used that tool to the best of its effects. But I also know that there are other tools out there that are being created that still haven't been utilized. I know Forward.us has Selfies for Reform, and they have a couple of other tools that they've created recently. They have a lot of hackers working with them and a lot of tech folks creating these. So I would encourage folks to really, maybe there's a way to put something together for folks, post this on it, like with links for things. But I would encourage you to do that. Every second counts. The clock is ticking. You know, and I keep saying that whenever I get an opportunity to remind folks that we have 2 calendars running on the House floor right now and in Congress. So we've got the regular calendar year, and then we have a private calendar for any private bills. And so those calendars run very quickly, and we really do need to put a lot of pressure until the 4th of July. I know that there's a lot of work being done on June 21st and June 28th. I'm helping organize some things on the ground in DC, and I know many of the other organizations are doing that. I'm working in particular with Dreamers Moms, which are undocumented mothers of Dreamers. I'm also going to be doing a couple of regional events to help raise scholarships for mothers of Dreamers who actually want to go back to school, you know, who want to do that kind of work. That work hasn't been done yet, and I think that it's, if it is an issue that affects women, we need to keep doing that work. So I'll be posting things online. Someone who's more technical savvy than I am is going to be handling the actual page management and all of that. But those are the projects that we have on there. And I would definitely encourage you, as Gabby says and as Pramilah has said, you know, we all spend a lot of time online, or we spend a myriad of ways of how we engage with folks. But those conversations will make a difference wherever you are in your daily life, at church, at the grocery store, you'd be amazed at what happens when you engage people in conversation and dialogue, or, hey, did you hear about that article? And just strike up conversations. And I know the more and more that someone told me, is there anything that you talk about besides immigration reform right now? Because everything is about immigration reform. And I said, actually, it's not. And let me tell you about the minimum wage. Or let me tell you, But the thing is, I think Eliseo put it well, is that, what now when we accomplished immigration reform in 2014, it just touches on all the other things that all the great things that we're going to be doing as a country to define the next level. So I would encourage everybody to, donate if you cannot physically do any of the civil disobediences. The efforts, they take time, money, planning, a myriad of things. And there are folks, I'm sure, like Gabby and like Pramilah, we're not sleeping a lot. Leanne, I think you don't sleep a lot either, and I'm sure that Eliseo, they're trying to make him sleep, but you become very passionate about it, and we need to communicate too. I would urge, as we're planning things, the communication process needs to happen. I know that when we were on the ground for the 48-hour fast with the 105 women, there was another hunger strike. There was a hunger strike happening in front of the White House, and we did our best to have a delegation go over and communicate and try to find out, what the strategies were. And in order to prevent the fragmentation that sometimes happen because you're working 24/7 and you're in your region and you're locally doing it, we need to learn how to communicate with each other. So I would also urge those of us who are more savvy about sending out emails and communicating on Facebook and tweeting and all that, to add people to your list and to let people know, because that's the way we're really going to keep this, a unified movement, is the work that we put together. And we have no excuse now, because now there are things that work for us that you could set automatically, to while you're sleeping, you can have emails go out and all these things go out, and alerts and everything. So I think what we do, and I'm really glad to see a lot of the women stepping forward into being more active, and the voices and the stories being told, and the multicultural aspect of it, I think, is really engaging, so that we understand it's not just a Latino issue, and that it does affect and impact. Here in Illinois, we've had the opportunity to build some really unique coalitions. People that wouldn't normally stand in a press conference together, people that wouldn't normally get in the same room together. If you start talking about some basic human rights, you'd be amazed at what happens. Like, people just want to have a decent roof over their head. They want to be able to buy food and things like that. These are some basic things that we're going to keep discussing and trying to define as we go on through. Once we get immigration reform, great. Now we got to deal with fast food, or we got to do, with quality of life, or whatever it is that comes on next. And as far as legislation happens, and legislators, you're not a born legislator. You actually come up through the ranks, and you actually, have to engage with your constituents, and your best ideas come from folks in the grocery line. You'd be surprised. So I'm really honored. I thank you, Leanne, for taking the time to organize this. I thank everyone who's been on this. I'm constantly learning, and even though I talk a lot, I do listen. Folks, I do listen. And
that's why you're here, because we want you to talk. We want you to
I thank you for taking the leadership to put this, forum together, and we hope that we get some feedback from folks who weren't able to be with us during the time period. I'm sure that a lot of folks are new to Google Hangout, and so I hope that we're able to do this again. And maybe Gabby can help us on that end.
Well, that only means that we're at the vanguard, right? That's why we always hope that we never left behind, like, some of the politicians out there. So I am so grateful to you, Gabby. You know that you're my sister, and I adore you. Thank you so much for being here, Susana. We have spent a lot of time together during the past, and also on the phone afterwards. And I know how hard you work on everything that you do. I appreciate the folks from SEIU and Eliseo for taking the time. You know, he's very busy, even though he's retired, and he took the time to be here. It's an honor to have had him. And Pramilah had to leave early too because she also has a meeting, being that she's running for office. So that we, you know, we lost a couple of them before, but we are so grateful for your time. We are grateful for the time of all of you out there who are watching, and we hope that this conversation is the first of many that we're going to continue having. We're not going to stop until the legislation is passed and this problem is solved and our families can finally be happy and together again. So thank you very much. This broadcast is going to be on YouTube. You're going to be able to find it on my channel, which is youtube.com/user/Elian Ramos. And again, thank you very much and have a great night, everyone. Great conversation.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.